Bienvenidos a un capítulo más de Diálogos Sensoriales. En esta ocasión, en la versión itinerante, tengo el gran placer de, bueno, ya vieron en la descripción del video, a Tom Carr. Tom Carr es una persona que tiene más de 30 años de experiencia en la aplicación de técnicas estadísticas en todas las fases de investigación sobre productos e ingredientes de consumo, un área de especialización que incluye diseño y análisis de estudios sensoriales y de consumo, diseño de experimentos para la optimización de fórmulas y procesos, y bueno, fundador de Carr Consulting. Antes de eso, en 95, estuvo trabajando en puestos técnicos y comerciales en Best Foods y NutraSweet Company. Y bueno, Tom también es profesor adjunto de evaluación sensorial cuantitativa en la Universidad Charles Sturt en Australia. Y participa activamente en la educación continua de investigadores y científicos, tanto en Estados Unidos como a nivel internacional. Tom es coautor del libro Sensory Evaluation Techniques, que actualmente va en su 5ª edición, y también Evaluación Sensorial y Control de Calidad. Es miembro activo de la Junta de Revisión Editorial de la revista de Sensory Studies y participa activamente en la estandarización de los métodos sensoriales a través del Comité E18 de la ASTM Internacional e ISO. Tom tiene una maestría en Ciencias de Estadística en la Universidad Estatal de Colorado y una licenciatura en Matemáticas en la Universidad de Dayton. También es un navegante, es kayakista y nadador competitivo. Ha estado en el mismo equipo durante más de 30 años y ha ganado varios campeonatos regionales en eventos de natación. Pero bueno, por cuestiones de la pandemia, pues las piscinas han estado cerradas y desde el año pasado pues ha estado más haciendo ejercicio en bicicleta. Y bueno, también es un cervecero pues apasionado, le podemos llamar artesanal, y bueno, pues ahora también la pandemia le ha dado oportunidad de elaborar y probar amplia variedad de estilos de cerveza, que bueno, ya platicaremos. Tom, thank you so much for participating into our series of Diálogos Sensoriales. It's an honor to chat with you. Unfortunately, this cannot be in person, but maybe next time, of course, we will grab a beer and start the description for that beer.
Of course. Thank you so much, Ivan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. And well, I as you heard, and I made your introduction, and you are a brewer. So is that where you start doing sensory, or when was your first time in sensory evaluation?
Well, my introduction to sensory was at Best Foods. I was trained as a statistician and hired at Best Foods in the research and development division. But most of my effort was process optimization early on. I was working with process engineers and oil chemists on optimizing the vegetable oil refining process. Best Foods sells Mazola oil and other vegetable oils. So that was my initial focus, design of experiments for process optimization. But one day I bumped into the vice president of research in the hall, and he said, "Tom, you're applying all of this experimental design to the vegetable oil refining. Do you think you could do the same thing with the sensory data?" And we happened to be standing right outside of the sensory department at the time. And I said, "Oh boy, I don't know. You know, it's pretty soft data. It's, you know, very noisy because there's people involved, and you know, but you never say no to a vice president." So I said, "Well, but of course, you know, we'll give it a try and we'll see what happens." And you know, the rest is history. I started doing design of experiments for flavor optimization, if you will. I became a trained descriptive panelist with Gail Seville doing the training. I was on the panel there for 6 or 7 years. And so that was really the introduction, was, you know, an accidental bumping into the vice president in the hall.
And how difficult was for you, because you are, let's say, if I may say, a number of people, people who deal with data, and how easy it was to deal with subjective, if I may quote that word.
It took a mental mind shift, because you're right. I initially thought, yeah, the subjective, or I overestimated the qualitative nature of the sensory data. But as I became familiar with the methods and began to do a little reading on the topic, you know, it's a field that welcomes statisticians with open arms, which is very rare. You know, most people look at statisticians as a nuisance, but you know, it was great. And, you know, there's just so much statistical rigor when you get into discrimination testing, when you get into the psychophysics with the Thurstonian modeling, and, you know, Fechner and Weber and Beidler models. These are all, you know, concentration response relationships that, you know, rigorous sensory modeling was taking place since the early 20th century with Thurston. So right. There was a great deal of background that, of course, I was unfamiliar with initially, but I really came to appreciate it. And then being a trained panelist gave me a great perspective on the intersection between the qualitative element of sensory and the rigor of the analytical side of it. Because, you know, there is a qualitative element to descriptive where you're doing the ballot development and you're talking with your other panelists about what are you going to call this perception? What attribute are we going to assign these intensities to? And that's, you know, there's a rigor to the qualitative element also. And that's what I came to appreciate more and more.
Right. And do you have a memory of one very difficult task at the very beginning? I mean, or maybe yesterday, I don't know, dealing with sensory people, just trying to explain them why not to use whatever test or something?
Oh, there's many instances of that, and you're right, it continues all the time. There's an old saying, if your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And many people are only familiar with certain sensory methods, so they try to make all of their problems fit that method. Probably the greatest, this is too strong a word, but I'm going to use it anyways, misapplication of methods I see in the discrimination testing. There's a lot of, you know, discrimination testing is highly rigorous, and it's very difficult to make multiple batches of the exact same formula indistinguishable from each other. So many perfectly good products would fail a discrimination test. And yet some people, the only sensory method they know is a triangle test or a duo trio. So they come in and they immediately ask for that test, where something more like a degree of difference or difference from control test might be much more appropriate. So that's picking the right method for a problem. You know, that's part of what we do as researchers all the time for our clients. We always have to have the courage to recommend the right approach to solve their problem.
Yes, courage is a strong word as well, because if you need to remove that thought from the department who has been doing that test for whatever number of years, it's difficult, but it requires a little strong in your insight. In that sense, when a sensory research can be confident with their knowledge, I mean, at what point do I need to study a lot? I need to read. I need to. What will be your suggestion about getting that confidence?
Oh boy, well, confidence is a difficult thing. I think technical competence is the starting point. You have to be aware of the methods that are available and become at least knowledgeable enough to know what they can do and what they can't do, set the boundaries on what each test method has to offer, and then be open to emerging methods as new methods come along. I had several projects in recent years where people were converting from the triangle test. The organization was converting from the triangle test to the tetrad. And there was almost an emotional attachment, both from the sensory people and the clients, to the triangle test. They had been using it for years, and it was like you were taking away, the baby's blanket when they were going to convert to some unknown, what's this tetrad stuff? But you have to be patient and know why the tetrad might be a better method and be able to explain it to your clients in a way that they can appreciate the advantages. I tell people all the time, technical competence is like a ticket to the game. What lets you play, but that isn't your whole job. Your job is to solve people's problems, and we need to really appreciate that. We have to know the methods in order to do what we're really being hired to do, which is solve problems.
Right. You have your hammer, but you need to look on your tool toolbox, right?
Yeah. Sometimes you need a saw.
Right. Right. Thank you. I remember the first time I met you at Davis, sometime during a sensometric event in a workshop for preference mapping. They were comparing PLS and preference mapping, other techniques. And
Helmick fee, as I recall.
Right, that's correct. And you came with a comment so simple, and I was like, okay, wow, that's how Tom is able to transmit the knowledge, the statistical knowledge in such a simple way. I mean, how you do that?
I don't know. That's my reputation, but I try not to become too focused on the mechanics of the method. Again, it's my obligation to know those mechanics, but I try to think more about what the method does for you, and instead of talking about statistics, I try to talk about what we can accomplish. And what problems we can solve. But I honestly don't know. I know that's my reputation as the statistician that can make sense. But it just comes naturally, I guess.
Very, very natural. So what do you think is the change that sensory evaluation did in your personal behavior, if I may say that? How sensory changed your perspective of the data?
Well, it certainly gave me a great deal of respect for the rigor of the information that we can acquire, both from a descriptive point of view and from consumer testing. As I said earlier, it really it's an area that you have to approach with a probabilistic mindset, with a statistical mindset that there's going to be variability, there's going to be diversity, and it's such a rich area for a statistician to become involved with, because it really makes you appreciate how helpful statistics can be in solving problems. We're looking for that signal, and we recognize that it's not going to be a black and white, but we have to use these great methods to identify that signal and separate it from the noise. And that's what applied statisticians do. It becomes a way of thinking. I mean, I approach everything in my life with a respect for the diversity that naturally exists. We try to do the same thing many times, in the same way, and it never turns out exactly the same. So you kind of look for what typically happens, and we call it the average.
Right, the average. Okay, and how well, you're a home brewer, and but I guess when you are trying your dishes or going out for a restaurant or whatever, do you tend to describe everything, or just leave your outfit for a statistician, or sensory sensometric will be the best word? It
depends who I'm with. I think certainly when we used to be able to get together for conferences, it was quite natural. If I was at ASTM or Pangborn or even Sensometrics, you'd go out for dinner and everybody would be sampling everybody else's plate. I still have very fond memories of when new people to sensory come out to dinner with us for the first time. They're very frightened because everybody's grabbing at everybody else's plate and trying their food, and they're like, I don't want you touching my food. But when I go out with my family, no, I mean, it's something you have to turn off, unless there's something very unique or interesting or an off note in the food, and you're trying to figure out what is there that's unexpected, then of course you become a little bit more, your descriptive panelist hat goes on. But most of the time you can turn that off if it's just a social gathering. And like you say, when I first sample a new batch of beer, I have my analytical hat on. Okay. Because I'm looking for taints. Did I do anything wrong? Did any bacteria get into the fermentation and leave off notes? But then, after the first maybe bottle of testing, then I just drink for pleasure.
Right. What type of beer do you brew?
I change every time. Right now, I'm brewing just a standard British ale, a pub ale. I did a chocolate stout previously. Before that, I did an American cream ale. So I tend to vary from a lighter beers to then more full-bodied, and then I go back to lighter, just for the diversity.
Right. And your favorite beer? Which is?
My favorite beer, I haven't found it yet, I hope. I really do like chocolate stouts or chocolate coffee porters, but they're something you have one glass and that's enough for a while. probably my favorite commercial beer is Pilsner Urquell from Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic. Yeah, it's the original Pilsner. I mean, that's actually what it means. Urquell means the first, so the original Pilsner beer.
Okay, so let's try to find that.
Yeah.
Maybe, who knows?
And Modelo Negro, wonderful beer. Actually, it's a München beer. It's a Munich, and it's one of the last traditional Munich dark ales that's made, and curiously made in Mexico. But Mexico has a grand brewing tradition.
Yes, and we have a plenty now factories, small factories that brew also local beer, and it's really interesting to try everything. I mean, it's not, there's not enough time to try everything, but it's nice that you can find a variety of beers in Mexico. So next time I will grab a Modelo Negra for you, Negra Modelo.
Just think of me, sure.
Yeah. Okay, Tom. In your opinion, what are the significant changes that sensory science had since your very first incursion in sensory?
I think there's been a maturation in the field where my initial introduction, everyone was very, very focused on the methods and the very rigorous application of the methods, and not as much emphasis on what we were learning and what how our information helped move the product development process along. And now I see much more of an emphasis on asking questions like, where can sensory make unique contributions to the product development goals of the company or whatever organization you're involved in, that can't be obtained from other analytical methods, from instrumental methods, and we're very successful at that. I mean, I've said many times in the past, sensory, I believe, really owns repeat purchase. There are a lot of metrics out there, non-sensory measures, that can be very predictive of trial. Being able, what percent of the people will try a product, and it's about advertising, it's about shelf space, it's about promotion, and these are all non-sensory things. What brings somebody back to buy the same product again? And that has to be related to the sensory qualities that the people experience that make them want to come back and buy it a second time or a third time. And, that's a unique contribution we can make. And I think the holy grail of sensory is, how do you create successful long-term success in the marketplace? We want to be predictive of purchase behavior.
Yes.
We know it's not liking. It's not just liking. Well-liked products fail frequently in the marketplace. So that's, I think if we can develop models that can predict long-term success, we're going to be able to retire rich.
Yeah. Yeah, but even with those models, it's not 100% sure, because it was, or it is based in a small population that can be representative, and there is a lot of implications with that information. I mean,
well, it's never sure. We live with 95% confidence all the time.
Right. Yes. And in that way, have you ever had or which was up to now the most difficult question that you need to answer? Can you share that? Do you have one memory about that?
Oh boy. Well, certainly repeat purchase modeling. Repeat purchases is a huge one. Mm-hmm. But more recently, the challenge I'm very interested in is trying to figure out how to identify valid preference segments. I think just the basic mechanical methods of cluster analysis or k-means clustering, yeah, they can group people together. But Hal McPhee at his talk in Edinburgh brought up a very disturbing point. He did a cluster analysis and correlated the liking scores of individuals to the average liking score of the cluster they were assigned to. And in an uncomfortably high percentage of the cases, the individuals were negatively correlated with the average of the cluster. And that runs completely contrary to how we interpret preference segments. We say everybody is moving together. They're not. And then there was a wonderful poster at the Providence, Rhode Island meeting where the researcher established that the same preference segments could be obtained, but people would switch from one segment to another after repeated testing. So again, thinking of it probabilistically, people can move from one segment to another, but in general, the segments stay the same. That might help explain why it's so difficult to get demographic or attitudinal measures to correlate with preference segments. Because when you go to a restaurant, you don't order the same food every time. So you have a different preference from time to time. And I think, people can have the same things happen. Some days you want a full-bodied beer, some days you want a light beer. So your preferences change, or at least your purchase behavior changes. So I think there's a lot we have a ways to go before we have the whole idea of preference segments right. And I don't think we're thinking of them correctly yet. So that's a very an interesting area to me right now.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. We just reached the point in the interview where by tradition I ask a series of comparative questions like 2AFC or something like that.
Okay.
Where it's not allowed to make it's forced decision. I mean, there's
okay, forced choice.
Please.
Okay.
You can skip it, of course, but there's no. It's forced choice.
As long as you don't ask me who my favorite child is, we're
no. Okay, triangle or tetrad testing?
Tetrad.
Traditional descriptive analysis or rapid methods?
Traditional.
Coca-Cola or Pepsi?
Would rather not answer that.
Tukey or LSD for ANOVA, per comparison?
LSD.
Beer or wine? Red wine?
Oh boy, that is a tough one. I'd have to say beer.
Preference mapping or PLS?
Another very tough one. I'm going to say preference mapping if we're talking about external preference mapping. I only because of the ready capability to identify ideal points in the model with quadratic terms. If we're talking about basic PLS, where they're all linear trends, then I'd have to say external preference mapping. But I consider PLS a preference mapping method.
Okay, okay. The final one. Parametric or non-parametric statistics?
Thank God you didn't ask me Bayesian. Parametric. The parametric methods are extremely robust, and other than violation of the assumption of independence, mm-hmm. The parametric methods are still quite accurate, even with departures from normal distributions. They can be adapted readily to deal with unequal variances. So I think there's a great deal of robustness there. And I also, and don't let this get around too much, you know, if the actual probability is 0.047 and my method comes back with 0.051, that's okay with me. You know, it's close enough. I'm a statistician. So I think that you know, there's room for accepting a little bit of variability there. You know, of course, there'll be times when it'll affect your ultimate decision. But I think for the most part, I'd rather have the added power that is suggested by a parametric method than to only rely on non-parametrics.
Right. So it depends.
Always.
Right. Thank you. And if you were able to do this, what would you say to Tom in the past, just before accepting doing sensory?
Oh boy. Probably read more of the science. I'm not a very good academic. So unfortunately, I probably spent a lot more time in my life learning things on my own that somebody else had already figured out. And if I would have just looked in the literature, there would have been an answer to my problem already solved. So, yeah, being a little bit more rigorous in the academic side of things probably would have made my life much easier.
Right. Maybe
not as interesting, because I had great fun learning all this stuff.
I know. Yes. Which was your difficult sensory methodology, or I mean the toughest one regarding how to deal with the data or how to interpret that, because it came from person or from people. So how do you transform that into an objective result? I mean,
yeah, I think probably the work that Sylvia King and Herb Meiselman and I did on emotions, I think those are quite elusive, and certainly there's been good progress made in being able to reliably measure that. The scales have been much more improved for their application to foods. A lot of the emotion scales early on were more negatively associated because they were dealing with, if you will, you know, individuals in a psychological crisis. So they tended to be much more negative emotions that were the focus of the scales. And with foods, we want to think about more the positive side of things. But how to measure them and how to reliably can you really ask somebody to scale joy or scale contentment? That. So yeah, that's been the such a inherently subjective thing as an emotion. I have a hard time feeling comfortable that we're doing it right yet.
Right. Totally agree. It's difficult. Sometimes I am not even capable to describe what I'm feeling. So
that's right. I always I think there's an interesting dichotomy. Ruta, who worked for me, Ruta Lesnauskas worked for me for over 20 years. She and I had a different opinion on this. When some of the questions would be, you'd sample the food and they'd say, what emotions does this food, make you feel? And maybe you do it with kata or something to check all that apply that. And Ruta said, oh yeah, I can do that, quite easily. To me, it was easier to say, what personality traits does this food have? And they would be the same terms, bold, generous, sophisticated. When I eat something, it doesn't make me feel sophisticated, or when I smell something, it doesn't make me feel sophisticated, but I could say, oh, that's a very sophisticated perfume.
Right.
Or it's, it's a masculine perfume or a feminine perfume. It doesn't make me feel more masculine or more feminine. But Ruta was like, oh no, she went with feelings and I went more with the personality of the product. So even just, there's an example of where the whole emotion thing becomes difficult to measure.
Right. Yeah, agree. Do you have a favorite, let's say, hammer or statistical test?
I have a couple. Certainly, design of experiments is the foundation of what I do, both from the formula and process side of things, where response surface methodology plays such a big role in that area, but also from the blocking structure, the design of the panels, where you have multi-day incomplete block designs that could be conducted at multiple cities or multiple countries around the world. That presents a beautiful challenge to the statistician for designing the experiments. And you get beyond foods. In personal care, you've got, if you're doing hair care, you have the subject that the treatment is being applied to. You have a beautician or a cosmetologist that might be applying the product to the subject. And then you have an assessor who is going in and measuring the impact of that treatment on the subject. Well, how do you design for the subject effect, the beautician effect, the assessor effect, and then get at the effect of the treatment? Fascinating, challenge for a statistician. So that's, I tell people when I go into schools, elementary schools, to talk about what I do, I tell the kids, I solve word problems. My job is to solve word problems.
Right.
But then on the flip side, the other side of things, it's the preference mapping stuff that I do. How many other people can say, my job is to predict how much you're going to like the next bite of food that you take? Right. That's a great, career to be in. And the fact that we can do it with some level of rigor is really something to be proud of. Yes, totally agree. And it's funny when you see that product you helped to modify, I don't know, maybe 20 years earlier and now how it evolves. So it's nice. It's
for instance, yogurt. I remember during my childhood, yogurt was like acid, extremely acid.
Yep.
But nowadays, it's not acid, but it's more sweet than acid, at least in Mexico. But
Yeah.
that's the thing, the evolution of a product.
And much thicker in body.
Yeah, correct. Can you suggest for these young students who are starting to do sensory or statistics in particular, do you have like a basic toolbox for that for they? Like, do you need to know at least how to calculate a mean, for instance, or something like that? Do you have that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the toolbox doesn't have to be extremely large. I think you need the ability to do basic probability calculations. So, calculate a binomial probability. We do so much of that with discrimination testing, not at all difficult. And of course, it easily carries over to being able to calculate probabilities from T distributions or Z distributions. Once you get it for one distribution, you can apply it anywhere, because that just means you understand what a p-value is. Mm-hmm. So that, of course, is critical to what we do. Data relationships, understand what regression really means. And that'll take you a long way. That gets you through the preference mapping. It gets you through response surface methodology. A lot there. Of course, ANOVA. Mm-hmm. So blocking. Understand that we're really trying to test for differences among the samples, but there's other things going on in the study that get in the way of that. And there's ways to deal with those other things. So the blocking structure. So I'd say, yeah, basic probability, analysis of variance with blocking structure, and regression.
Right.
Because, PLS, the multivariate stuff comes almost on its own. I mean, I think sensory people very quickly recognize that our measures are correlated. Mm-hmm. And to find out that there's these statistical methods out there that deal with correlation is an easy thing to accept. So that comes along naturally. Right.
And for reading, do you have of course, your book, of course.
Of course.
But do you have like a paper or book poster to suggest to the people who is trying to understand statistics or apply it to sensory?
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, let me pull up. Might be hard to find this anymore, but Statistical Procedures in Food Research, edited by John Pigott, was just a wonderful book. I mean, it covers experimental design, Hal McPhee, discriminant analysis, John Powers, generalized procrustes analysis, Tony Williams. I mean, these are multidimensional scaling, Sue Schiffman. These are the people that wrote the Bible on these methods, and they contributed chapters to this book, partial least squares, Martins and Martins, so Harold and Magny Martins, Jacobson and Gunderson on cluster analysis. So, I mean, if you want to find a book that has almost all the statistical methods that you're going to use in sensory, and this was published years ago. This was published in, let me see, 1986. Wow. So, nearly 40 years ago. So wow. Really, yeah. But this is just a wonderful book and written by the people that really knew what they were talking about.
Right. Well, the time flies, and I just realized we just reached our goal. But what would you say to the sensory people who is struggling with statistics? I mean, at the time we finished school, we tend to be scared about statistics. And how do you transmit that confidence to them, or to lose the fear of doing a decision based on statistics?
Well, there's two elements to that, or two parts to the answer to that question. One, the fear is, you know, you have to recognize that we're never completely sure of our answers. Nothing, you know, and that's just part of life. So you're never going to be 100% sure that you're making the right decision. So you know, hate to be rude, but live with it. I mean, that's just part of living. And then the other aspect is, if you're unsure, consult a statistician. The methods are out there. They are reliable. If that's comforting enough, then just, you know, accept that you're, you know, 95% confidence is pretty doggone good. You know, businessmen are not, you know, they're not right 95% of the time. You know, a successful businessman is somebody that's right more often than he's wrong. So 95% confidence, wonderfully high. And the other thing is, yeah, if you're uncomfortable with doing it yourself, try to establish a relationship with a statistician who you can understand, who can communicate well with you. And it might take, you know, several, you know, you might have to try several different people until you find somebody that okay, now I get what he's saying or she's saying. I'm going to go to that person in the future.
Right. Tom, thank you so much for the time and that you share your thoughts in these Diálogos Sensoriales. You are one of the brightest and kindest people I know in sensory. And do you have something else to share with us before we finish this interview?
No, I really don't. It's been a wonderful pleasure to do this. I look forward to being able to travel south again, hopefully in the near future. And I wish everybody health and comfort, and that's about it.
Thank you. Do you have a Twitter account or something you want to share with the people who is looking at this interview?
I don't have a Twitter account. I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And I don't have a business Facebook page. I LinkedIn and there's of course carconsulting.net is my website. And anybody that wants to get in touch with me, you know, tom.carr@carconsulting.net. I'm more than willing to entertain questions and interact with anybody that is willing to listen to me.
Right, that's something I miss from these symposiums and events, where you can sit in the same table with you and share opinions for the conferences or the lectures, whatever. So that's a very nice part of the events who is now missing. I mean, hopefully soon, right?
Soon, hopefully.
Yep. Stay healthy, Tom. Thank you so much for your time.
Entirely my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. A ustedes muchas gracias por vernos. Si les gustó, denle like. Si no les gustó, no digan nada. Nos vemos en la siguiente emisión de Diálogos Sensoriales. Hasta luego. Chao, Tom. Big hug.
Chao.